Hello from the Heartland. My name is Jenna, and this is Smarter News. News when it matters and why it matters. Our Smarter series features unique people who help us think and live smarter. Brandon, many news stories over the last year have really focused on law enforcement in the United States. How would you describe policing in America?
Well, I think in the reality sense, policing in America is probably the most heroic job you can ever do, most honorable, integral, in a job with, where most people have to have an extensive amount of integrity. So it's a great profession, good retirement, good benefits, and you have a chance to save people's lives on a day-to-day basis. Now, what's portrayed in the media and then the lies that are told by politicians is that, it's the worst profession ever, which have created an environment that good people are feeling the pressure, feeling not unwanted, feeling, like they're being betrayed by their own city. So these politicians and people mostly on the left are creating an environment where it doesn't feel like a heroic profession. It doesn't feel like, you going out doing the right thing every day. It feels like, the people in the community hate you and everybody's ready to turn on you. And a lot of good people and veterans are retiring and they're not wanting to be a part of policing in America. So I think it's a great profession and it should be treated as such, but unfortunately, it's taken a bad turn.
I want to speak to you a little bit about, we're going to unpack a little bit of all of that. You have a really unique background to bring to this conversation because you actually were a police officer. And that's a voice that sometimes is missing from this conversation we're having about policing in America. So let me give you a little bit of more of a proper introduction, Brandon. You basically run your own media empire. You have millions of people that view you on a regular basis, listen to you on a vast diversity of topics. So I could say that you're a speaker, you're a commentator, but you also are the co-founder of something called Blexit. For those who don't know what that is, what is Blexit?
Well, Candace Owens and I think back in 2018, we launched Blexit. It's a play on Brexit, the British exit. So it's kind of the black exit. And a lot of people associate the black exit with the exit from the Democrat Party. But our focus and mission is not necessarily politics, but it's the exiting from the brainwashing that has gone on that Candace and I both felt over time, and helping people make the right decisions for their own lives, giving them the proper information, giving them the inspiration and encouragement to be the best version of themselves and make the proper decisions, whether it's political, whether it's professional, whether it's, how to raise your children. We're starting a after school program to help young people in school. We have 40 plus chapters all around the country where we go into the communities, we feed people, we do back to school drives, we talk to people, we educate them, we have events. And so it's something that we feel very passionate about because this is just not occurring in the inner cities and it's not occurring in the Black community.
When you were an All-American high school football player, did you imagine this life that you're living right now?
Well, kind of, sort of. I think I'm considered to be pretty popular. I have a lot of influence, but I thought I would be doing that as an NFL football player. So when I was a high school All-American and all of the guys I played with, in the U.S. Army All-American game in 2005, all of those guys, most of them went to the NFL. And so I just knew I was going to play in the NFL. I was going to be a star football player. I thought I was going to make millions and millions of dollars and I was going to buy my pastor a new church. And but I think
it sounds great. I'm totally into it. So wait a minute. So you went to college on a full scholarship for football. You were in the NFL draft. And then what happened?
Yeah, I think God had another plan for me. My college football career didn't go the way I wanted it to go. And for the viewers, I think they'll find it pretty interesting that I played with a lot of people that are prominent. I played with Rob Gronkowski. I played with a whole bunch of individuals that's in the NFL. Nick Foles, he won the Super Bowl. But Gronkowski won the Super Bowl as well. So 2 Super Bowl winners. I played football with them in college. So, but it didn't go the way I wanted to go. My attitude was bad. I'm going to admit that. I came from a pretty violent background. So I had a terrible attitude before I got saved in 2008 and God changed my life. But the wheels fell off the car, man, when I was playing football and I didn't have the opportunities that I wanted. I didn't play as much as I wanted. But because I was such an incredible athlete, I still was able to be in the 2010 NFL draft, even without playing a full game in college at all. And,
wow.
Some things transpired that I'm incredibly frustrated about, meaning that my coach, badmouthed me pretty bad to the Oakland Raiders. And they were going to draft me. They promised my agent they would draft me in the 6th or 7th round. They passed on me because of, in part, some of the things that were said about me by my coach. And God took me down a different path.
How soon after that experience? I'm sure that was a huge disappointment. I come from an NFL family. My father played in the NFL, Brandon. He played in Super Bowl IV. Just so that we're clear. He doesn't love me mentioning that. He's like, you're making me sound so old. I'm like, Dad, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's historic. It's Super Bowl IV. So my brother played college football and was hoping to play professionally as well. And that didn't happen, went down a different path, but it's very disappointing, especially when you pour so much of your heart and your time and your soul into a game and into a sport. So how soon after that did you decide, wait a minute, okay, I'm not going to go to the NFL, but I am going to go into law enforcement? What was that decision like?
Well, the fallout for football was incredibly disappointing. I mean, it was one of the worst times of my life. I mean, while I was in college, not sitting on the sideline, bench, not playing, knowing I'm the greatest athlete on the team, it was heartbreaking. And then I had gotten saved and I thought God was going to rescue my career and everything was going to be fine. Oakland Raiders were going to draft me and it all fell apart. And I was upset with God. I mean, I was in a very bad place professionally when all of my dreams appeared to crumble in front of me. Now, however, I met an incredible guy named John, and John is a multimillionaire, successful CEO. And he decided out of the blue to mentor me. And there was a connection because my son's mom at the time played volleyball with his daughter. However, he decided because my son's mom and I had a baby in college and he knew that we were young and we were in college. She hadn't finished college. She was playing volleyball, that we could have chose to have an abortion and not had a baby. But we chose life and was facing a very, difficult situation. And he decided out of the kindness of his heart to support us financially. And he mentored me. And after the first year, I didn't get drafted. I trained for an entire year. And then the NFL lockout happened. And so the day of my tryout, the NFL locked out. And I paid $400 for the flight to fly to Arizona because I was training in Texas. And my dreams crumbled again. But John showed me a better way. And he told me, he said, look, man, let me explain this to you. These NFL players, they make millions, every now and again. If you're not Tom Brady, you're not making that much money. He was like, I'm a professional, I'm a CEO, and I make more than these NFL players, and I make that for the rest of my life. 83% of these NFL players go and they go bankrupt. So, young man, there's a better way. Don't get too caught up in the NFL dream. If it doesn't yield results, then write an X on the calendar. And so that's what I did. And I ended up applying for everything in the city of Tucson. I didn't even think about being a cop. Growing up, I didn't even like cops. I was told that cops were racist white people. But after getting saved and being desperate, I had a child that I had to take care of. So I said, I'm going to do it all and see who called me back. And the police department ended up calling me back, and I wasn't even expecting the call. I'm thinking I done something illegal or something. They're calling me to investigate me, and they said, hey, man, we are you still interested in a job? And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. I did apply. However, I knew nothing about policing. So I had to do a ride along. I said, I'm going to do a ride along and see if I really want to do this. Is this something I like? And I'll tell you what, that ride along inspired me. I mean, it inspired me. The first time in my life I saw a hero in Officer Sean Payne, and the rest is history.
What did he do?
Excuse me?
What did he do that you saw a hero in him?
It was crazy. So first of all, he was kind enough to take me on a ride along and didn't know me. I pulled up on him at the parking lot of a substation on the east side of Tucson without warning. I mean, he probably thought I was going to rob him, and I pulled up on him and I said, hey, man. And he looking at me like, what is this guy doing? And I said, hey, man, I would like to do a ride along. I want to see what the policing is about. He's like, all right, man. And believe it or not, he's a white guy. And so people in his culture, they think that, there's all this racism going on, which is not true. He said, come on, man, ride with me tomorrow. Come to the substation. We'll give you a ride. First call we do was a simple call. It was a lady on the side of the road. He helped her change a flat tire. And I'm like, I can do this. This is nothing to me. This is boring. Oh my God. The next call was a suicidal call. It was a guy who was actively committing suicide. So we jump in the car and we're going 70, 80 miles per hour down the residential street, a main thoroughfare. And we almost died 3 times because people don't know how to move to the right. And so we dodging, we hit the corner. I've never gone that fast in my life, especially not in the passenger side. And so we're going hauling rear end, man. We're maxing that car out. We get to the scene and like it's in an apartment complex and they can't find the apartment because the guy didn't give an address or nothing. So I'm running behind these officers. We're running to apartment. We actually found the apartment. They briefed me. They said, hey, have you ever seen anybody killed before? Have you ever seen anybody shoot themselves? Just be prepared. You may see this. And I'm just, the drive over had me flustered. And so they forced entry into the house. I was a little bit further back. So once they went in, they let me come in and look. And so they go in and this guy is in the back at a table and he has a knife and he's cutting at his wrist. Now, obviously he's going this way. He's not going vertical. But he's cutting at his wrist and Sean Payne them saved this dude. And I'll never forget Sean Payne I got back in the car after the call and like, I can't even breathe. My heart is just, I'm still shocked at the drive. And he gets back in the car. He goes, hey, man, what was you saying about your family? And I'm just like, what family? I don't even know what you're talking about, dude. Did you just go through what I went through right now? And I had to ask him, I said, do you do this every day? He's like, yeah, we do this every day. This is an everyday thing for us. And I was just blown away. I could not believe this guy who was a normal person like me. He was a human. He was another human. And he had these superhuman abilities. And the fact that he could save somebody's life is just beyond me. And from that point on, I said, you know what? I want to be a hero like Sean. I really want to do this. And I became a police officer and, now I'm here.
and I want to connect the dots there too. But, Sean was asking about your family. You mentioned a violent background. Where did you grow up? How did you grow up?
So I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, in a very, my family expanded over time, meaning that we progressed over time. But when I was younger, my mom and dad, they split up. I never saw them even like each other when I was growing up, except one time when I was in college. And that's for another story. But they didn't really have a good relationship when I was growing up. My mom didn't know her dad. My dad didn't know his dad. Interestingly enough, my grandmother had my mother when she was 12 years old. She had gotten raped and had my mom when she was 12. And so very, very peculiar situation. My mom dropped out in the 8th grade. And my dad graduated high school. He became a firefighter at the age of 19. And so we had this interesting dynamic. And a lot of people don't know about this, but, I grew up in a very difficult environment. My stepdad died from a heroin overdose. He was and I don't mean to front my mama out. My mama know I love her, but he was a big time drug dealer. He was a gang banging guy. And, it was, we grew up in that environment, and a lot of our cousins and family members were poor. We had cousins who had roaches in their house and, we still went over there all the time. We got arrested. Me and my brother both. We got arrested. I was 8. He was 10 for smoking marijuana in a vacant house. And we were with, 6 of our other cousins. And that was a pretty traumatic experience. Me and my brother got jumped into 5 Deuce Cougar Crip gang when we were little. We probably was like 11, 12. My cousin jumped us in at his house. So we went through some of that, hood drama, beginnings. And as time went along, my dad got more promotions. We moved out of the neighborhood, stuff like that. However, my high school that I went to, and one reason I'm going to be honest, because they were excellent in football. That's the reason why me and my brother both were All-Americans. But the school was in the middle of the hood in Stop 6, Fort Worth. And it was nothing but gang violence and dudes pulling guns on each other in the parking lot, like high school kids. So I came from a pretty interesting beginning. And I'm not going to say all my life was like that. My mom them tried their best to put us in private schools when they could. My dad moved us to Crowley when we lived with him. So it was very diverse. We had a taste of, poverty, and not our household, but through family members and exposure, poverty and gangs. And then also had an experience with living in a safe environment with my dad, stuff like that.
How did that background influence you as a police officer?
Well, it was the contrast between when I was a kid exposed to the police and actually seeing what police officers really do. That was huge for me, because I had realized that most people have no idea what police officers are doing. even when it looks like they're not doing right, there's so much more to the story. And there's so much good that police officers are doing. And 9 times out of 10, they are right, and people may not agree, but they're right. And so that conflict or that contrast really helped me. But then also when I was patrolling, having that exposure to some of my family members being crackheads, being around them on a day-to-day basis, and being exposed to that helped me have more compassion for people and be able to reason with people and understand them and have empathy and speak life to them because I had been already exposed to so many of these things. And so that helped me tremendously. And, a lot of that really gave me the passion that I had as a police officer.
And so you did a couple different things as a police officer. I read part of the SWAT team, also worked in training, which we're going to talk a little bit about. You also worked in public information, which is also a key part as a journalist. Everyone knows the public information officer is exactly who you need to talk to when something's going on to try to find out what's happening from the police department. I was doing a little Googling research of you, Brandon, and I saw an article from March 21st, 2016. This will give us some perspective. So almost exactly 5 years ago. And you were the subject of a Washington Post article about a police officer, just this normal police officer named Brandon Tatum, who decided to go to a rally for President Trump. This moment was significant for you. Why?
Well, it was the crescendo of a lot of other stuff, because I grew up a Democrat. When you're black, you're a Democrat. When you come out of the womb, people say, "Oh, you're a Democrat." Democrats for the black people, Republicans are racist white people. I don't care who say what. That's exactly what you're taught in most households when you're black. So that was my perception growing up. And then, it was my perception even after I got saved. However, I was less prone to racial division and racism. When I, at least from my perspective, I grew up and I was, my family was kind of racist. I'm not going to lie, not necessarily my dad and mom, but a lot of my extended family didn't really like white people. And you could never date a white girl and bring her home. That's peer to peer. You would get bullied for stuff like that. So anyway, grew up in that type of environment. I got saved and I broke from that. But however, I didn't break from the ideas of politics. And it wasn't until Barack Obama started trashing police officers and that I really started to not like the Democrats. And I started to really see that people started exposing different things to me about Democrats, about, how they were the party of slavery. They were the party that opposed, and in part, they imposed the civil rights movement and all of these different things. It started to be unraveled during Obama's administration. And so after I decided to be, that I was never going to support anybody that didn't support men and women that wear the uniform, I left the Democrat idea. I left the Democrat Party and I started looking into Republicans. And I loved Ben Carson. And Ben Carson was my guy. He was a very intelligent, inspiring man of God, well-spoken, the things that he think about or say are well thought out. Like, I love the guy. He dropped out and endorsed Trump. And I'm like, the guy's not an idiot. So what's about this Trump guy who I thought was just this billionaire man that's going to embarrass these politicians, get some name recognition, and go back to living his life? He's still in the race. So he came to Tucson, and I said, you know what? I'm a man. I'm an independent thinker. I'm not going to listen to the media say that he's a racist white man. If you go to his rallies, you can get beat up just because you're black. I said, well, I'm going to go see for myself and give him a fair shot. And plus, when am I going to see Donald Trump? The guy's a big deal. So I went to the rally and it blew my mind. The protesters and the liberals, the leftists were the maniacs. They were screaming at people. They had barricaded the doors. They wouldn't let people out. It was out of control. And as a police officer who grew up in an environment where you had to be tough, and I was on a SWAT team, I was a little intimidated because I didn't know what they were going to do. They were calling me a white supremacist, me, as I'm walking into the event. And they were horrible people. Trump was nice. The people in the arena were all family. Everybody was having a good time. Trump came out there speaking about issues that I really care about, that really matters to the American people. And I said, I got to say something about this. I wasn't even really a supporter of Trump at the time I made the video, but I said, let me just say something about this. And I thought maybe 100 people would see it. They'll like what, and it went viral. And then that started an effect that has led me here.
And to what you're doing now. So when did you end up leaving the police department and why did you decide to do that?
Yeah, in 2017, I made a video because when I was a cop, I was making videos, and they all were pretty much going viral. I made a video in 2017 about Colin Kaepernick, and it went mega viral. He was kneeling for the American flag, making all these lame excuses. I had enough of it. And the funny thing is, and most people don't know this, so this is an exclusive take. So there's a guy that I played football with in college named Nate Ness. And Nate was in the NFL. And so we were arguing back and forth about Colin Kaepernick. And of course, I had my opinions. He had his opinions. And he said something that really struck a nerve in me. He was like, "You just mad because you can't play in the NFL." And so it just sparked me because I wasn't going to say anything about Colin Kaepernick. James T. Harris, which was a local radio host guy, had already made a statement. His video had like 14 million views. I was like, I'm not going to talk about it. But when he said that, it really struck something in me because it's like, football, dude, I put my life on the line every day. I'm in the real game. If I lose, I don't go home to my family. You talking about a game. And then you defending this guy. So I went to my car, I had my SWAT hat on, and I did a rant for like 10 minutes. And it got 70 million views. And everything began to change after that. Because this had been my second viral video. And so an organization out of Anthem, Arizona said, "Hey, we'd love you to be a spokesperson for us. Would you consider doing it for a year?" They paid me $20,000 plus more dollars than I was making as a police officer. My signing bonus was almost my salary as a police officer for 1 year. And I said, I can't turn this down. Like, I can always be a cop. I'm still certified for 3 years, even if I take a year off. I'm going to go and try this out. If I don't like it, I'll go back to being a cop. But lo and behold, I did it. And then I met Candace Owens and then, it just kept going from there.
And here you are. Okay. So I have a bunch of questions about policing, the environment in policing right now, what you can share from your experience, and also talking to other cops that may be missing from the conversation that we're covering in the news, whether it's about the Derek Chauvin trial, the verdict, or any number of news stories that we're covering on Smarter News. But I do want to ask you one other question about your background that I think would be helpful to understanding your framework. You've mentioned being saved multiple times. And for a long time, Brandon, I grew up Catholic in San Francisco. I never heard until I was an adult, probably until I was in my late 20s, did I hear someone say they've been saved. So I didn't know exactly what that meant. And maybe there's some other people out there that are like me. So what does it mean to be saved and how were you saved?
Well, so, I grew up in a church, but the church wasn't in me. We would grow up, we go to church every Sunday, but we didn't read our Bibles. When my parents didn't really hold us accountable to it. But I always had God in my understanding. The Christian faith was something that was in my consciousness. And when I got to college and then football didn't work out, it challenged my faith. I'm like, is God real? What am I going to do about this? And I started going to church in 2008. And I went to a church, Emmanuel Grace Apostolic Church, and they're considered a holiness church. If people that actually go to church and that are in the little church jargon, they're a holiness church, apostolic church, one God faith, and all that stuff. So I went there. I felt like I was at home. Everybody was nice. I'm from Texas, and this is Arizona, and it's not a lot of black people in Arizona. So at the time, all black church made me feel like I was at home. And so according to the scripture, when you look at John 3:3-5, you must be born again, is what the Bible said, born of the water and the Spirit. And the interpretation in our church is that you must be baptized in water and filled with God's Spirit. So that is considered being saved. While I was at the church, and it could be a long story. I had many dreams. God was really tugging on me to really focus on my relationship with God. And when I went to the church one Sunday, my friend was there. She was crying before they did the altar call. And I said, I'm going to take her up there. She needs to know God. She's clearly crying and she's not brave enough to go up there. Well, I took her up there and they ended up praying for me too. And so, and God began to deal with me, and I got baptized that day in Jesus' name, and I got filled with the Holy Spirit 3 days later, and I spoke in tongues, and which is what my church believe in. I spoke in tongues, and from that point on, my life has changed forever. I mean, instantaneously after I got baptized, I quit listening to rap music. I stopped cursing. God had just changed me. I mean, it's supernaturally. I will never. Nobody can ever explain that to me. You know what I'm saying? Other than the scripture explaining it. So that's what I mean when I said I got saved, is that God rescued me. And just a quick note on that, some people may not understand the story of the Christian faith just real quick, that Jesus died on the cross for our sins is the interpretation of the Christian faith. And so his death on the cross and death, burial, and resurrection was mimicked or you could say represented through baptism. So that's the reason we got baptized. And we believe that our sins have been forgiven by the work of Jesus Christ on the cross, which saves you. So
that's great to know. It's great to have that understanding. We're made up of so many different, I was talking about this the other day about, journalism is sort of like putting together a quilt. You're a quilt maker and you're pulling together different threads and different pieces of fabric. And, one day you're going to focus on one piece of fabric and another day you're going to focus on another. But that's also true of people. These are different threads that make up who we are. And so it's great to have that understanding of kind of where you come from, what sort of perspective you have to really lend this conversation, this broader conversation we're having about policing in America. So I'm going to turn to a couple of the headlines. We're about a week after the verdict was read in the trial of Derek Chauvin. Was justice served in that trial?
I really don't know. I wasn't at the trial. I wasn't a juror. I didn't really hear all the evidence that was presented. I saw it on the television. I looked at as much as I could. My personal opinion, I thought there was a reason. There was, the verdict wasn't beyond a reasonable doubt. The charges weren't beyond a reasonable doubt. The things that they presented in court wasn't beyond a reasonable doubt, in my personal opinion. However, the jurors thought something different. But the question comes in, did he get a fair trial? Was this fair representation? I thought he was an idiot. I didn't think he should have done what he did. I was a police officer. I would have never done what he did. He should have played into the camera, man. You a white man sitting on a black man's neck and people are yelling at you and the guy saying he's dying. When I was in the academy, we were taught you take everybody seriously, even if you think they lying. Because if they die, and when you didn't take them seriously, you get fired and you go to jail. And so the things that he did put him in the situation that he's in. However, when you paid a family $27 million before they finish picking a jury, when you have jurors from the jurisdiction in which they burned the entire city because of George Floyd, he had multiple funerals, gold casket. He is the most popular person in the world, as far as race relations and criminal justice reform, all this crap that they talk about. How can you get a fair trial? And then you have politicians coming out and saying, we need more violence if they don't come out with a guilty verdict. You have the president of the United States, suggesting that they're going to give a guilty verdict. Like, how can you be a juror and make an impartial decision based on facts when you will literally get killed if you don't make the right decision? The country will burn down because of you if you don't give a guilty verdict. So I think that it's unclear if this was really justice. And what is justice in the grand scheme of things? George Floyd was a crook. George Floyd was a criminal smoking drugs and resisting arrest. And he could have died from the drugs that he ingested and all of the life of drug dealing and drug usage that he had done. So I don't think this is justice for what? This wasn't race related. They say it is, but it had nothing to do with race. They were treating George Floyd with respect. At that moment of time when he was on the ground is when things went south. So I don't really know if this is justice. I think a lot of it is political jargon. I don't think the guy had a fair trial, whether he's guilty or not. So I think that our country really needs to take a look in the mirror about this situation.
What do you want the country to see?
I want them to see that this is all fluff. There's a guy named Tony Temple that died just like George Floyd. It was worse than George Floyd. They made fun of him. They were laughing at him while he was dying, suffocating him. He was white. So nobody talked about it. Nobody even know what I'm talking about. Most people have no idea what I'm talking about. And so that should tell you something about the fact they don't care about what police do to people. They just care about what white cops do to black people. And when you look at George Floyd, this had nothing to do with race, although that's what they're pushing. This was one police officer out of hundreds of thousands of police officers around the country. This was one black man out of 40 million black people in this country. And this interaction went south because of problems on both sides. But yet they're telling us that this is a systemic racist problem in our country with law enforcement. They don't train law enforcement officers to kill people. What reform are you going to do if a cop do something that he's not trained to do? You're going to reform the way they train. They don't train you to suffocate people and put your knee on their neck for 9 minutes. So.
Okay, so let's talk about training, because that was something that you did inside the police department. And there's been a lot of talk about what needs to be done to address the problem. And we'll talk about different ways of defining the problem. Because as you point out, there's different ways that people see this. But a question that has come up really from all sides is about training. And when I say all sides, all political points of view, whether or not police officers are being trained the right way, whether or not they have the resources. What was your experience on that? What do you think? Was this situation involving Derek Chauvin and George Floyd partially because of a lack of training, bad training, or just simply was it bad decision making?
Right. And I think that anybody who has never been a police officer, that never went through the police academy, they should never comment about training because they don't even know what we're trained to do. We are trained, heavily trained, to do all of these things. We're trained very well in the academy. However, I think that we need more money and more funding to continue the training. We need more time to train these interactions, but at the same time, you can't train life and death. You can't train these split-second decisions because you're not going to really die in training. It's another police officer acting like a crazy guy that's going for a knife. It's not a real knife, and you're not going to really die. However, when you're faced with it in real life, it's almost impossible to train for it. However, I do think that police officers need the training that their department believes is necessary. Not all police officers need extra training. The Tucson Police Department don't need training. We have a lot of training. We have semi-ignition training. We have live fire training. Our academy we train how to fight. We train how to do ground game. A lot of our police officers do MMA fighting, jiu-jitsu. We're trained in that to do some of those things in the academy when we're faced with these obstacles. We're crisis intervention trained, meaning we know how to talk to people who are in crisis. We have a crisis line. People come to our calls, like crisis intervention staff come to our calls. Counselors come to our calls if we need them. We don't have a problem. There's probably a lot of other agencies that don't have issues. However, if you find one and they need more money for training and, more ammunition so their officers can train to shoot the gun so they can be more accurate, more confident, I think that's relevant. But people don't even know what we're trained to do in the first place. And then they make comments about, we need better training. Well, you got to know how to articulate that or we're going to just be spending money going nowhere.
What do you think is the effect or the impact of if we look over the last year, the impact of the death of George Floyd, the arrest of Derek Chauvin, the subsequent political debate, social debate that came after it? Now we have the trial. We have a verdict. Derek Chauvin is guilty of murder. What do you think is the net effect on policing or police departments, police officers that are going to work every day?
Yeah, it's going downhill fast because this situation should have never been promoted like it has been. And politicians are using this as a political leverage to do whatever they want to do. It hadn't gotten any better. They're talking about, we need more. We need more justice. People like LeBron James is posting a picture of an officer that justifiably shot somebody and said, "You next." This is revenge. This is not peace. This is not unity. So it's getting worse because they never cared about George Floyd in the first place. This was one piece in a puzzle for them to enact whatever they want. So I think that this had a negative effect on our society because we chose to lie about this situation. And it's really hurting law enforcement because now it has given credence to these bums out here lying about race relations. This was justification to say, look, racism is real. This is the first time we've had justice. Well, let me explain this to people that are watching this. If they never protested, I think Chauvin would have been convicted exactly like he was. The day after the film came out, he got fired. And they indicted all the officers involved, which I think was very extreme. And they didn't have to protest. He had a tough hill to climb. He was on a man's neck for 9 minutes. He was probably going to get convicted no matter what. Just like Walter Scott, who shot the officer in the back, shot the guy in the back, put the taser on him. It was a no-brainer. You don't have to protest. That dude is going to jail. Laquan McDonald, the officer that shot him 12 times, killed him before he even hit the ground. He was the only officer that shot. It doesn't take a rocket scientist or protesting. He was going to go to jail. You can't do things like this as an officer in the United States of America and not be held accountable. But because they lie and they conflate all these issues, it'll give a person to believe that Chauvin was not going to get convicted, that this was going to be close. No, Chauvin, everybody saw that. You can't do that and get away with it in America. In the last 60 years, you couldn't, in my personal opinion. So, I think that all of these lies have created a matriculation down of negative perceptions of policing. Now they're talking about defunding the police. Now they're talking about we need every police officer to go to jail. We're going to hold them accountable. Even an officer in Ohio that justifiably shot that 15-year-old who was attempting to kill another person. They even want him to go to jail. It is turned into a crap storm that I think that it's going to take a decade or so to get out of.
One of the tough things about journalism is that you have to weigh all the facts, but you also have to include feelings. And feelings sometimes, aren't necessarily, you can't fact check the feeling, right? It's just how someone feels. LeBron James, he did send out that controversial tweet on social media. And he ended up taking it down because it was viewed, as you were pointing out, as a threat against this officer of saying that he was going to be next to be killed. What LeBron James said after that, and I'm not defending it, I'm just sharing it with our audience so we could kind of put these pieces together. He said that he wants accountability, that he feels that there's a lack of accountability. And we've heard that time and time again, Brandon, from others, that police misconduct happens and that there's no accountability. And that's why we do need reform. We just spoke to an attorney that was talking about this, saying, what other tools do we have? If we're going to hold people accountable, we need the law to do so. And maybe we need to improve the law. What do you say to that argument?
Well, I think it's slightly a false argument, because if you're talking about Chauvin, then okay, I think that if he got off, then we got a problem, to a certain degree. If he didn't at least get arrested, because what he did necessitated probable cause to arrest him, in my personal opinion. When you're talking about Laquan McDonald, you're talking about Walter Scott, you're talking about some of these cases. Yeah. I mean, if they got off, this would be a problem. But when you're talking about other individuals, Tamir Rice, you're talking about the case with, Michael Brown and all, these were justified shootings. You talk about the girl, Micaiah, that was a justified shooting. The problem is that they conflate Chauvin, Laquan McDonald, Walter Scott with the Micaiah girl or any of these other guys who have gotten shot who justified. You can't reform things when you are messed up in the way you're looking at it in the first place. We have to be able to determine, is this justified or not justified? Not how you feel. Media has completely lied about the Micaiah girl. They act like she didn't have a knife. They're skipping film. When she get ready to stab a girl, they cut film and say allegedly she had a knife. You can't argue police reform when you're lying about justified shootings.
I want to show you something. I printed this out this weekend because I said, I got to ask Brandon about this because, I'm always looking at how journalists are covering the story. And I turn to the Associated Press a lot because that's the wire service. You usually get some good background information and maybe not as partisan as other news sources. So this is the headline. I want to read it to you. One verdict, then 6 police killings across America in 24 hours. That's the headline. Okay, so what's wrong with that headline in your opinion? And then I'll tell you what these 6 killings are.
It's pushing an agenda. What does 6 police shootings in different jurisdictions by different police officers that are trained differently in different scenarios have to do with a verdict? But what they're doing is that people only read headlines. So if you are listening to a narrative that cops are now retaliating because of the verdict in Chauvin, you read that and you say, look, this is proof. Look, they're shooting people all over the place now because of the verdict. The police all over the country didn't like the verdict of Chauvin. That's what they're going for. Sensationalizing. Now in the text, they may clarify it at the very end.
This is right. So this is on page 4. You get to some of the details. One was the incident in Columbus, Ohio with the teenage girl. One was a man who shot someone outside his home and then shot at police when they came. So he was killed by police. One was a young man that said that he was wearing a bomb and had a rifle, and they had the SWAT team out. They tried to talk to him, and then he moved towards police, and then he was shot and killed. Another one was a man, we're going to hear, this is becoming more of a big story this week, Andrew Brown. He was being served a warrant, and he tried to drive away in his car, and he was shot at the time. We're getting more information on that actually as we speak now. Another one was a man who has been arrested nearly 200 times over the past 20 years. He charged at officers who had ordered him to drop a pole that he was holding, and he ended up dying. That's just a few of them. But you do have to go into the pages to understand, are these all similar? Are they all the same? Are they all different? Right.
I'm sorry.
What do you think? No, hearing that, what do you think as I'm going through those?
Well, this is a tactic that they use. They can't just completely lie.
Who's they? When you're talking about they?
The media, I think the media outlet, they're sensationalizing things. They want to get you to watch it and look at it, but people don't read. People read the headlines. That's why news media write headlines. You got to make a compelling headline because people will glance through and say, look at all these shootings that occurred after Chauvin Chauvin's case happened or whatever. And it's almost like a retaliation. That's what they're going for because most people are ignorant. They're not going to read those cases. They're going to say, see, and they're going to read another headline. They're going to read another headline about Micaiah. They're going to go down the rabbit hole. They're not going to read these things. And they're going to bring pundits on television to talk about lies. This is my personal belief. And because this is the rhetoric that people are saying against me on all of my social media platforms, and I have to correct them. They'll say, look at this. I'm like, no, it's not true. Read the rest of the story or read the end of the article because this is a scary scenario when you have a man arrested 200 times and he running an officer with a pole, guy with a bomb, with a rifle. You got people who are acting bizarre. And nobody's talking about the behaviors of people that necessitate police response. Police aren't the problem. It's these people. And we need to hold people accountable too. When we have a situation like Chauvin, I ripped his rear end in my analysis of what happened what Chauvin did. And I ripped George Floyd too. How do you avoid a Chauvin situation? George Floyd should have made different decisions. Young man, young woman, if you are going to buy something in the store with illegal money or fake money, to understand that you're going to put yourself in a path that you may interact with a cop that don't care about your life. So avoid that. Don't resist arrest. And you will never get to Chauvin. You will never get to an officer like Laquan McDonald or Walter Scott that the guy shot him in the back. You will never get there if you do the right things. And officers, how do we help officers make better decisions? How do we fire officers who are illegitimate? We could have those two conversations. However,
how do you do that? How do you do that? If there's the right way to do that, if you do fire and hold officers accountable, which we're going to talk about accountability, what does that look like?
You know what? It's very difficult, right? Because you go through the academy, very extensive. I don't know how bad cops make it through all that. That's a lot to do and you want to do wrong. I mean, they really put you through the ringer. And then when you get out, you're on probation. You got FTO. I was a field training officer. That's the most stressful part of my life ever was when I was in field training. And so you go through all of that. You do a psychological evaluation, do a polygraph test. You have a detective investigate you when you're in the application process. So if you are to make it through all of that, two things have happened. You are a complete narcissist and you can evade all of the things that will point you out as a bad person, or you become bad. And it's almost impossible to judge that. We had a guy that I fired. I was a part of firing him on the Tucson Police Department. Decorated military veteran. He had a wife and kids. He breezed through the academy. Same field training that I had, he had. The guys who trained me trained him. Gave him excellent results. He was a yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Haircut neat, uniform neat, polished boots. This guy was amazing. He raped a prostitute on duty. And we have GPS trackers on our cars. We have body-worn cameras. I can't describe, I don't know if your audience would,
No, I think we got that. It sounds horrible.
He used protection when he did it. And then he threw it in the trash can at the jail in the restroom that only police officers could use. This guy blew everybody's mind. The question is, how do you prevent that? There was no red flags, no signs. This guy had something in him that nobody knew about he could cover up. So there are going to be cases that officers are going to do the wrong thing that we can never detect. However, when they do it, we can hold them accountable. We have a robust process that weeds out majority of these police officers that are bad. But sometimes they go bad, which means that I think cops need access to better counseling, to resources, because you get messed up when you become a cop. You see things that people have never seen before. You have the burden of the world on you. Every day you go to work, everybody's worst moment is on you. And you got to go and have a real life after that. But you don't have a real life because all of the death, all of the trauma that you see, that you endure, you go home empty because you've given it all away to everybody, just to give them enough hope to make it past the shooting. Give them enough hope when you tell them that their son is never going to come back again. And you just saw him in a body bag with 12 shots to the face and chest. Like, so maybe we need to give officers some more counseling if needed. Maybe we need to challenge our politicians and citizens to be more kind and respectful to these officers who are going and doing the things that most people aren't willing to do.
That's a really interesting point. We haven't really heard a lot about that, about how compassion is a two-way street. And maybe that's how we need to really view all sides in this conversation, with a little bit more compassion. I want to ask you a question about something that's been a huge obstacle for me over the last year. And it's one that Republicans and Democrats have talked a lot about. And it's actually some common ground, although different political parties approach solving this problem in different ways. And that's a question of data. So when we get a story, for example, where there's someone who dies in police custody, in the case of Derek Chauvin, we know it's now been called murder. In other cases, it won't be called murder unless someone is tried and convicted of that. So when someone dies in police custody, that's why I'm using that term. We want to be able to give it context as journalists. You know, how often does this happen? For example, how common is it? Where does it happen the most? You know, how can you look at the story just from the data angle? And one of the things that I've learned is that police departments report their data in different ways. So some police departments are really forward leaning and they have all their data about anything. Other departments are not. And so often you look to a federal database because that's where, you know, you think things are going to be held. And what I've learned is that it's a lot of the data reporting is voluntary. So both sides, when they use data for their argument, are using incomplete data. We actually don't really know how big of a problem this is because if we're looking just at the data itself. What can you tell us about that? I mean, from your experience as a police officer, but also do you believe that better data reporting from police departments would help this conversation happen in a more accurate way, where there could be common ground, where people are accessing the same information so they could discuss it? You're shaking your head no. Why is that?
No, because people are honest. Like, some people just hate the police officers. They just hate them. They think that every cop is racist. There's just systemic racism on the police department. They don't matter what data you can put. They're going to distrust the data that you give. Just like the justice system. When Chauvin gets convicted, the justice system did the right thing. When they don't convict another officer, the justice system is wrong. It's like, well, do you trust it or do you not? You know, but they only trust it when it benefits them. However, every major police agency reports data. So Tucson Police Department, a city of a million people, metro, we had 1,000 officers. We report data. LA County, that has 40,000 police officers, in New York City, that has 40,000 police officers, they are reporting data. You know, Dallas PD, Austin PD, these major police departments, DC Metro, all of them report data. They're talking about some town with 6 officers that, you know what I'm saying, that everybody know that, you know, they go and drink on duty or something. You know, some podunk town or some smaller city that don't have a lot going on. So that's not going to give you it's not going to change the wave of police brutality or something because of these smaller agencies that are reporting. And I think people just act like the police are just inherently against the people. Like, a lot of police departments may not share certain data or may report them differently to the federal government, but internally you need data so you can do well, so you can catch bad guys. So we need to know how many people are shooting at us, how many people are being arrested, are our officers doing the right thing? Because no police chief in the United States of America wants to be the police chief that your officer goes out and rapes people, or your officer goes and shoots somebody for no reason, because the burden falls on you. You have to get before the press and say, my officer did this and that. What does that reflect on you and your career and your legacy? So I think people are blinded thinking that police chiefs are out here saying, okay, Chauvin, I got your back, man. I was a cop. No, they don't have your back. If anything, there's a huge divide between patrol and the command staff. Patrol hates the command staff in most departments because the command staff is about politics. The command staff is about looking good and image. You do one thing wrong, they will fire you. They will throw you under the bus because they have an image, they have a city council, they have their job on the line. People are getting mixed up because they don't know what's going on police departments.
One of the reasons we don't know is that we don't get to talk to police officers.
Yeah, you can't because...
Why? Why is that? Because you worked as a public information officer. Why can't I just go into Austin and talk to a couple cops on the record? Why can't I do that?
Because you have class some of the stuff is classified information, privileged information that you can't disclose. Like you can't necessarily on duty disclose certain things about investigations or certain things about policies that aren't already public record. If you start to go down that path, then you can be liable for certain things. And then also, you can't get out there and give a controversial testimony or give a controversial thought because you can't patrol anymore. If you ever get caught on TV saying something that could make you a prejudiced officer because you just giving your opinion, because as an officer, you're supposed to be impartial. You can't give a side. And you get on TV and you start leaning more towards pro-cop behavior. When you get to court, you know what they're going to say to you? A good attorney is going to say, Officer Tatum, have you ever made this statement? How can the public trust that you're impartial when you went on Fox News representing the police department and saying that you believe in Blue Lives Matter? Your testimony is screwed, and people don't understand that. So police officers have to protect themselves. That's why you only have a PIO. Sometimes they have multiple PIOs because you can't have people giving mixed messages. You can't have people who are uninformed giving statements. You will reflect poorly on the police department. The PIO will give a statement. The chief will come out and give a statement because they talk to attorneys. They know what can get the department sued. They know what they can and cannot say through an investigation. They talk to detectives. Before I ever gave a statement, I have to go to the detective. What information can I not give out that will compromise this investigation? So all of these things create an environment where cops can't say anything.
Did you get in trouble? Did you get in trouble for any of your videos that you were doing when you were a cop?
No, because I was a PIO and I knew what the policies were. And so I said whatever I wanted to say without disclosing what police department I work for. Now, somebody can go and do a research and probably find it, but I was an Arizona police officer. I never told what department I worked for. I never represented my department, never had any indicia of my department, and I never spoke about specifically, some of the cases that I did. So I was fine. I knew what the policies were. Some officers don't, or they don't care and they get in trouble. So,
well, I think it's really important for people to know that's one of the reasons why you don't hear the voice of your average police officer regularly in news and in some of the storytelling, because they're not actually allowed to speak to the press for any number of reasons as you mapped out. And it's just important to keep in mind. I just have a couple more questions. You've been so generous with your time, Brandon. I do want to ask you, you said a while ago that there's split second decisions that police officers are making. And there are multiple voices about whether or not they're making the right decisions and why they're making those decisions. The president, very shortly after the Derek Chauvin verdict was read, spoke to the United States of America, and he said this. He said, "The systemic racism that is a stain on our nation's soul, the knee on the neck of justice for Black Americans, the profound fear and trauma, the pain, the exhaustion that Black and Brown Americans experience every single day." So he's talking about what he thinks is the broader issue underneath these stories is systemic racism. You've alluded to the fact that you don't believe the same as the president. Why not?
Well, first of all, that's not Joe Biden thinking. That's somebody wrote a script for him. He read off a teleprompter. Joe Biden and these politicians are going to say what they think people want to hear. That Joe Biden gave the eulogy of a former Ku Klux Klan member, Robert Byrd. He also supported Strom Thurmond, both of them were against the civil rights movement. He was also a part of the 94 crime bill that put a lot of Black people behind bars, for minor drug offenses. So he don't really care about systemic racism or systemic prejudice.
But he's representing a point of view, though, right? That is out there, right? That is this idea that systemic racism is at the core of what we're watching.
It's a lie perpetuated by these politicians. Systemic racism is not at the core of anything. I mean, any American can walk out right now and go to Starbucks, black, white, or green, and you're going to have a fair interaction. You and I are both different colors, and we are having a conversation right here on this podcast. You didn't look at me and say, "Oh, I don't know if I want to interview him because he's Black." Nobody thinks like that. Most people don't think like that. They are conjuring up controversy. Chauvin's case wasn't even about race. It was a Black cop that was associated with that and an Asian cop. So what, this is a diversity of cops doing this to George Floyd. And they were incredibly nice to him the day before that. George Floyd has never died from police officers until this point, and he's been arrested I don't know how many times. He went to prison for a home invasion where he put a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach and forced her into a room. He never died on that, so this is one interaction with one officer and one person. But this systemic racism thing is conjured up. Policing in America is not systemically racist. You know how many Black cops are out there? You know how many Asian cops are out there? Are people willing to call them racist? In Atlanta, it's the police department is 50-50. In Philly, the police department is 50-50, black and other races. Are they racist? No, they're not. They're making these things up because it's politically expedient, and they can push an agenda. Because if they can get you to believe that the country is racist and systemic racism is a problem, who are you going to vote for to fix it? You're going to vote for them. And have they ever fixed it? No, they aren't, because it's not true. You can't fix systemic racism in this country because it's the boogeyman. They can't point to you a racist institution. And if they do say that the institution is racist, well, who is the racist person in the institution? What judge is illegally putting black people behind bars more than white people? That should be very easy. You can look at a judge's convictions. That dude should be off the bench. He should not be able to practice anymore. Why don't we see that happening every day if they're really fighting racism? Because it's not true.
Okay, so let's talk about solutions, right? Because you're going to have a group of people that are going to listen to what you just say and say, Brandon, I completely disagree with you. There is systemic racism. It goes back to the founding of America. This is one paradigm. You have another person that's listening to you who's like, I absolutely 100% agree with Brandon. And you got these two different sides. You probably have some people in the middle listening to both. How do you get past that conversation? What is the way past that conversation to something better, that where both sides feel acknowledged, but somehow we move past the conversation to where there's some sort of improvement or move towards a solution of some sort, if it exists?
It's never going to happen because we have people that are going to believe what they believe no matter what. I mean, Jesus could come down and say, there's no racism in America. People will reject Jesus. They won't listen to him. That's why we have two-party systems. Democrats and Republicans won't get along no matter what. I mean, we should be going down the same path, but they can't, because you're a Republican, you can't agree with Democrats. Because you're a Democrat, you can't agree with Republicans. And so if you're black, you can't believe that there's no racism or that racism is not a big factor in America. You can't do that. So, however, my goal is to tell the truth. And people who want to know the truth or who do the research on their own, the truth will be revealed to them. All we got to do is look at some statistical data to debunk some of the myths. People think that black people have an issue with police officers systemically more than white people do. Look at the stats, even the reported shootings. White people get shot twice as much as black people do. White people are shot unarmed twice as much as black people are. Tony Temple died like George Floyd, never got a single T-shirt. And so when you look at that, and then you also look at crime, you say, well, black people are patrol more. Okay. Black people make up over half of all violent crimes in the United States of America. This is convictions. This is not just alleged. These are people who are convicted in the court of law. Also, black people commit half of the murders in the United States of America. Black people only make up 13% of the population, not 50-50. They make up 13%. And we can agree that all 13% is not murderers and killers and thugs. It's probably 3% out of the 13 that are doing this. So 3% of the people in our country are committing half of the murders. That's why police are in these inner cities. I grew up in the inner city. I know how violent it is. That's why cops are there more so than they are on the north side, where people are just mowing the grass and watering their yard. And the only calls they get is because somebody stole a lawnmower tool. Nobody getting killed. So
if you feel like these two sides will never be able to speak to each other, really have a productive conversation, then why have hope?
I know, because this is this thing. Inevitably, our country is not. Listen, empires, they fail all the time. Rome was great. The Moors were great. There's always a crescendo. Unfortunately, I wish to God it wasn't the case. The Bible talks about how in the end days, it's going to all crumble and Jesus is going to come back. We can't expect to have a kumbaya. People are evil and people have ulterior motives. Nobody really want to get to the truth. There are some people in the middle, like you said, that are saying, you know what, I'm open. That's what I want people to be in the middle. Don't just listen to me. Listen to the other side. Do your research and make an evaluation, but be open to both sides. Don't just pick a side. I learned because I grew up being brainwashed that I had to be a Democrat, that white people are racist. And then I realized that, wait a minute, why are they not telling me these things? Why don't they tell me that the Democrat Party was the party of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan and did not vote for the Civil Rights Act? The Republicans did. The first black politicians were Republicans. The NRA was established by white people and black people. I mean, at the NRA, the NAACP. Why don't they tell us that? Why didn't they tell us that the first legal slave owner in the United States of America was a black man? Why did they tell us that hundreds of black people owned slaves too during slavery? Because they are trying to push an agenda. If they teach us our history, we will realize that we aren't divided. We're supposed to be together. Now, here is my solution to the problem. Don't go on emotions. Don't go on people you like. I know I'm very charismatic and I'm very convincing. Don't listen to me. Go and do your research.
And very humble.
Inform. I mean, I'm just keeping it real. Just do your research and be informed. Go look at police interactions. Do the numbers. There's only a police department that's maxed out, meaning that they have full capacity. There's only 2 officers for every 1,000 people. There's not a lot of police officers anyway. I was on a SWAT team. I was in the most dangerous city in the state of Arizona, Tucson, Arizona. Our SWAT team was busier than most SWAT teams around the country. And we only had 1 million people in our jurisdiction. And I never shot anybody. I had 2 people that I could have shot, but I didn't shoot them. Most officers never shoot people. Our chief grew up in Tucson and was a Tucson police officer and then became chief 30 years on the park, never shot anybody. Most people on the SWAT team will never shoot anybody. Only our snipers, and we had 2 other guys that shot people. But that's their job. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. When they hit the road, they're the front line. Most cops don't get into shootings. Most people don't interact with police. 80% of the public don't even interact with police. We only interact with 20% of the public, and only 5% we interact with consistently. People got to wake up and realize that the media is pushing an agenda that's not really occurring. Black people, it's 40 million black people in this country. 14 black people were shot unarmed last year? And that's saying that's if you want to say that all of them were unjustified, which we know is not true. But 14 out of 40 million black people, but that's like 0.00000 something percent of you being shot by a police officer unarmed. I wish that people would wake up, see these politicians, what they're doing, see the money grab, and say, we are not in a racist society. Let's focus on treating people the way we want to be treated. Let's focus on what Martin Luther King said. Martin Luther King wasn't burning buildings. Martin Luther King wasn't pushing a racist agenda, a segregation. He said, judge a person by the content of their character. We should be doing that individually, not collectively. I mean, I don't care what my neighbor does, but I know what I'm going to treat my neighbor fairly. My neighbors are white. I go and wave at them and treat them fairly with kindness. And if they don't reciprocate, that ain't my fault. That's on them. But that's what we need to get back to doing, is saying, stop looking at the collective. Stop trying to act like you can read everybody's mind in New York. You don't even live in New York. Just focus on your neighbor right across the street from you.
You know, it's so interesting, Brandon. We had just last week, a woman, attorney, mother, like you're a father. She's working on civil rights legislation. And you know what? She actually came to the same conclusion that you did. You guys come from very different points of view, but she came to the same thing, which is that you can't over anticipate what you know about someone until you actually talk to them, and then treat each other with respect. I want to finish with this. We're called Smarter News. We're trying to work to solve a problem in media, which is, a lot of the data, you can get either side can make the data do acrobats and serve an opinion. I'm not saying that about you. I'm just saying in general, we're trying to cut through some of that, right? We're trying to actually have conversations that are helpful. And I always like to end with this, because we are Smarter News. How can we be a little smarter about something? So how do you think we can be a little bit smarter when we see these headlines coming from your perspective, which is a law enforcement background? What is a tip you could give our audience about what they should consider?
If it sounds too juicy, do some research. If you hear a story of a black man shot, in the back of the head with his hands up, just take a breath and say, that's very bizarre for a cop to do that. That sounds crazy. Just go and do the research. Don't stick with the headlines, because headlines are sensational. I make videos. I try to make my headlines attract you to read what I got to say. So understand a headline is just a headline. Read the text. And if you want to be fair, you want to be balanced, make sure you listen to a variety of different people. There's a lot of people that's watching this right now, and they probably love me and they think that everything I say is right. However, hear from the other side so you know what their arguments are, because I could be wrong, and so I want people to balance, look at headlines, read the text. And if it sounds too juicy, like when Jussie Smollett, said that these MAGA dudes beat him up in an alley in 0 degree weather, just think about it and say, let me read a little more. When you hear a police shooting that occurred, police shot a 15-year-old girl, black girl, understand that they making money off of you clicking on it. So don't jump on it. wait a minute, wait for the body-worn camera to come out, and then evaluate it. We've already learned that a lot of this stuff gets fluffed up, and then you find out that it's not the same case. So be informed. And I'll leave it with this. Treat people the way you want to be treated. You know, if you're a minority or whatever, and you don't like when people judge you because you're Black or because you're Hispanic or because you're white, then when you look at a police officer, don't judge them because they wear the uniform. Give them a fair shake. You know, believe in the best of them like you would want them to believe in you. And if they show you something different, then allow them to show you who they really are. But treat people the way you want to be treated. Love your neighbor as if you love yourself. And I think that if we do that individually every day, we'll begin to unite. The people who want to unite will begin to unite, and our country will be a little bit better.
That's really some great advice. What's next for you, Brandon? Not only today, I know you have a 2-month-old, I think. Is it an 8-week-old baby that you have? Besides running your own media empire, you also have a little infant. So what's next? What can people expect next from you?
I mean, I do it all. I got a book that's coming out called Beaten Black and Blue. It's a little bit of my life. Some of the stuff that we talked about here is going to be in my book. It comes out later this year. If people are interested, they can go on beatenblackandblue.com, get on the email list so they can get the thing. But I do everything. I speak all over the country. If people want me to speak somewhere or they want me to come to their school or whatever, they're interested in hearing something from me, I have a website, theofficertatum.com. Theofficertatum.com. You can go in there and push book. But I do everything. I'm on social media. My YouTube channel, I give commentary every day, and I come on beautiful shows like yours. People want to see what I'm doing. My website will probably be the central ground that you can go to, and you can find out everything you want to find out about Brandon Tatum.
Well, I really enjoyed learning a little bit more about your story, Brandon. Thank you. That's really, time is a valuable commodity. So thank you for spending some time with us, giving us that background. And when your book's out, let us know. Come back on. Tell us more about your backstory, because that was really interesting and we loved hearing from you. So thanks for coming on Smarter News.
My pleasure.
Quick, concise, nonpartisan, Smarter News, a refuge from the storm. I'm Jenna. Thank you for choosing smarter.